To gain one's soul in patience, कीर्केगार्ड की किताब फॉर अपबिल्डिंग डिस्कोर्सेस का लास्ट डिस्कोर्स है, विच इज़ अबाउट द फिलोसॉफिकल क्वेश्चंस कंसर्निंग द सोल. हर डिस्कोर्स में कीर्केगार्ड बिगिन करता है विद अ कोट फ्रॉम द बाइबल, और इस डिस्कोर्स में ही हैज़ यूज्ड अ कोट फ्रॉम ल्यूक 21:19 विच इज़ इन योर पेशेंस यू विल गेन योर सोल्स. एट फर्स्ट ग्लैंस ये कोट हार्मलेस लगता है, बट हाउ कैन आई गेन माई सोल? जब मैं अपनी सोल के साथ पैदा हुआ था, हाउ कैन आई understand that even though patience is useful, how am I to gain my own soul? कीर्केगार्ड शुरू करता है हमारी कॉमन अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ पेशेंस के साथ, जहाँ पे फॉर एग्जांपल एक ट्रैवलर है, ही इज़ ऑफ ऑन टू अ लॉन्ग ट्रिप, ही नोज दैट ही शुड हैव पेशेंस, ही शुडंट रश इनटू इट, वरना वो एग्जॉस्ट हो जाएगा. जैसे एक फिशरमैन है एंड ही नीड्स टू बी पेशेंट वाइल सिटिंग इन हिज बोट. इन दोनों के लिए पेशेंस एक टूल है विच विल हेल्प them attain a certain goal or a certain possession. So understood this way, patience so far is a soul strength that everyone needs to attain what he desires in life. But Kierkegaard says कि ये जो patience है, it is not the same patience which Luke 21:19 refers to when it says, in your patience you will gain your souls. This is because इस तरह के पेशेंस की जो यूटिलिटी है वो रिलेटिव है, बिकॉज एट टाइम्स इम्पेशेंस आपके लिए ज़्यादा प्रॉफिटेबल हो सकती है देन पेशेंस कुड एवर बी. जो पेशेंट फिशरमैन है, ही माइट लुक लाइक अ फूल सिटिंग इन हिज लिटिल बोट वेटिंग टू कैच फिश इन कंपैरिजन टू हिज प्रैग्मेटिक कोलीग हु जस्ट बुलडोजेस थ्रू द ओशन. तो इस तरह की जो पेशेंस है इन दो मिसालों में, ऑफ द ट्रैवलर, ऑफ द वेंडर और द फिशरमैन, इट डिपेंड्स ऑन एक्सटर्नल क्राइटेरिया, और ये वेरी करती है फ्रॉम सिचुएशन टू सिचुएशन. But if this Bible passage was referring to this kind of patience, Kierkegaard says, तो ये जो possession है of the soul, it would become merely a question of luck or of divine selection, and it would undermine the whole question of inwardness or of selfhood. ये जो external understanding है of patience as mental strength, it is not just based on a confusion of outwardness and inwardness, but ये एक error है which we perpetrate constantly in our dominant desire for possession. बेशक वो पावर हो या मटेरियल गुड्स की फॉर्म में हो, नॉलेज की या फेम की फॉर्म में हो. कीर्केगार्ड इसको समराइज करता है इन द डिज़ायर टू पोजेस द वर्ल्ड, बट दिस डिज़ायर इज़ अ कंप्लीट एक्सटीरियराइजेशन ऑफ वन सेल्फ, ऑफ माई सेल्फ, विच नॉट ओनली एंड्स इन माई कंप्लीट failure but also in my complete reification as I become fully entangled by material relations and I become dependent on outward forces. Kierkegaard कहता है इस बारे में, in the first moment then a person is in a position that people later crave as something glorious. He is lost in the life of the world, he possesses the world, that is, he is possessed by it. But in the same moment he is different from the whole world and he senses a resistance that does not follow the movements of the world's life. If he now wants to gain the world, he must overcome this disquiet until once again, like the undulation of the waves, he vanishes in the life of the world. Then he has won the world. However, if he wants to gain his soul, he must let this resistance become more and more pronounced, and in doing so, gain his soul. For his soul was this very difference. It was the infinity in the life of the world in its difference from itself. यहाँ पे कीर्केगार्ड कह रहा है कि a human being is closest to being a material being in the moment that it is born. It is completely dependent on external forces, लेकिन right from the start एक core difference है between a human being and the world that needs to be more pronounced, that needs to be strengthened, that you need to strengthen, and that becomes weakened when you pursue to possess the world or to gain from the world. तो ये जो very difference है, this difference he calls the soul. और वो कहता है it was the infinity in the life of the world in its difference from itself. And the desire to know and to gain one's soul, that is what he calls inwardness in these words. If a person possesses his soul, he certainly does not need to gain it, and if he does not possess it, how then can he gain it, since the soul itself is the ultimate condition that is presupposed in every acquiring, consequently also in gaining the soul? Could there be a possession of that sort which signifies precisely the condition for being able to gain the same possession? In the external sense, there is no such possession. The person who possesses the external does not need to gain it. In fact, he is even unable to do that. He can give away what he possesses and then see whether he can gain the same thing again. He can use what he possesses to gain something new, but he cannot simultaneously possess and gain the very same thing. If there is any question of such a possession, then it must be found in the internal. If it is not to be found in the external as such, then it is not to be found in the temporal as such either. Since, more closely defined, it was actually temporality that made it impossible to possess and to gain the external simultaneously. Because that which is in the moment either is or is not, and if it is, then it is not gained, and if it is gained, then it is not. A self-contradiction which enunciation of both these statements would be: temporality does not understand this either as a riddle or as the solution of the riddle. In the eternal, there is no such self-contradiction, but not because it, like the temporal, either is or is not, but because it is. The eternal is not either a something possessed or a something gained, but is only a something possessed that cannot be gained any more than it can be lost. Then this self-contradiction must be sought, if anywhere, in the internal, but the internal is, after all, in its most universal expression, the soul. Lastly, Kierkegaard बात करता है about having knowledge of your own soul. और वो कहता है कि merely knowing the soul does not equate to gaining it. वो कहता है, but if a person is to gain his own soul, then he certainly must know it before he begins. This, of course, is true precisely because the person who knows his soul has still not therefore gained it, but it is precisely therefore also true that if he does not begin to gain it, he does not know it. Even if he could know it completely before he gained it in patience, this knowing would still be only a possessing, just like that first possessing, the condition for his being able to gain his soul in patience. This is why all knowing that is unrelated to a gaining is incomplete and deficient, inasmuch as a person still does not know how he becomes, since he becomes through the gaining, and even in association with the gaining he remains deficient, for we still do not know what we shall become. The person who knows his soul sees himself in a mirror, but he can forget what he looks like, as the Apostle James says, and therefore what he goes on to say is pertinent here, that the one who hears the word properly is the one who does it. As long as he merely hears the word, he is outside it, and when the proclaimer is silent, he hears nothing. But when he does the word, he continually hears what he himself is proclaiming to himself. And any mere hearing of the word is infinitely more imperfect than it doing, not only because the doing is superior, but because in comparison with the exactitude of doing, any oral communication is very imperfect, both in its brevity and in its prolixity. Therefore, knowledge of one's own soul, if one wants to regard it as a gaining, is a self-deception, because even in its greatest completeness, it still is but a hint of what manifests itself in its definiteness during the gaining.